They said she killed a queen. They said her touch was cursed. And tonight, bleeding out on her examination table, was the Alpha Commander who had condemned her to this frozen hell at the edge of nowhere. Commander Rowan Cade, the war hero, the untouchable legend, was dying from shadow poison, and every healer in the kingdom had already declared him dead. Everyone except the disgraced Omega they'd exiled 3 years ago. Sarah Vance stood over his convulsing body, her scarred throat tight, her hand steady. She had one chance, one forbidden technique. And if it failed, they'd blame her for another death. If you want to see how an outcast healer brings a kingdom to its knees, destroys a conspiracy that reaches the throne itself, and proves that the weakest voice can shatter the strongest chain, stay with me until the very end. Hit that like button, drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from, and let's dive into a story of betrayal, survival, and the bond that changed everything. The wind howled through the cracks in the wooden clinic like a chorus of ghosts. Outside, the mining district of Ashevale trembled beneath another winter storm, the kind that turned men's breath to ice and made even the hardest laborers think twice about venturing outdoors. Inside the small, drafty building that served as both home and hospital, Sarah Vance moved through the candlelit shadows with the precision of someone who had learned long ago that hesitation cost lives. She was wrapping a miner's broken hand, his third injury this month, when the door burst open. 4 soldiers stumbled inside, their armor slick with rain and mud, their faces pale with panic. Between them, they carried a man on a stretcher, his body limp, his breathing shallow and ragged. Even from across the room, Sarah could smell it. The sickly sweet stench of shadow poison, a toxin so rare and so lethal that most healers only read about it in forbidden texts. "Healer Vance," the lead soldier barked, his voice cracking. "We need you, now!" Sarah's hand stilled. The miner whose hand she'd been binding pulled away instinctively, eyes wide. Everyone in Ashevale knew what shadow poison meant. It meant death. It meant corruption spreading through the veins like black fire, devouring everything it touched until there was nothing left but a husk. "Lay him on the table," Sarah said quietly, her voice barely more than a rasp. 3 years ago, during the interrogation after the Queen's death, they had damaged her vocal cords. She could speak, but every word came out rough, like gravel scraped across stone. The soldiers obeyed, hefting the stretcher onto the examination table with a thud that made the entire structure groan. And that was when Sarah saw his face, Commander Rowan Cade. She froze. Of all the people in this God's-forsaken kingdom, of all the souls who could have been carried bleeding and dying into her clinic in the dead of night, it had to be him. Rowan Cade, the Alpha Commander who had stood before the council 3 years ago and declared in that deep, unshakable voice that Sarah Vance was a danger to the realm, that her experimental methods had killed Queen Alara, that she should be stripped of her title, her status, and exiled to the frontier where she could do no more harm. She remembered his eyes that day, cold, unyielding, certain, and now those same eyes were half-closed, glazed with fever, his lips cracked and bloodless. "He was ambushed 2 days ago," the lead soldier said, his words tumbling out in a rush. "Shadow creatures. We tried everything. Every healer from here to the capital said the same thing. There's no cure. But we heard you were here, that I'm a disgraced charlatan who killed a queen," Sarah finished, her ruined voice flat. The soldier flinched. "That you were the best healer the kingdom ever had." Sarah said nothing. She stepped closer to the table, her gaze moving over Rowan's body. His armor had been removed, revealing a linen shirt soaked through with sweat and something darker, black veins that spiderwebbed across his chest and neck, pulsing faintly beneath his skin. Shadow poison. Advanced stage. Maybe hours left, maybe less. "You should have brought him to the capital," she said. "To the royal healers." "They refused," another soldier whispered. "They said he was already dead." Sarah's jaw tightened. Of course they did. The royal healers were cowards. They cared more about their reputations than their patients. If Rowan Cade died under their care, it would be a stain on their records. Better to let him die out here, in the forgotten edges of the kingdom, where no one important would ever know. She looked down at Rowan's face. Even now, dying, he looked every inch the Alpha Commander. Strong jaw, sharp cheekbones, dark hair plastered to his forehead with sweat. His breathing was shallow, each exhale a faint rattle. He had condemned her, destroyed her, taken everything she had ever worked for and ground it into the dirt. And now his life was in her hands. "Get out," Sarah said. The soldiers stared at her. "What?" "I said get out. All of you. If I'm going to do this, I need space and silence." "We can't just leave him." Sarah turned, her pale gray eyes locking onto the lead soldier with an intensity that made him take a step back. Omegas weren't supposed to look at alphas that way. Omegas were supposed to be soft, deferential, compliant. But Sarah Vance had been stripped of her Omega status the day they exiled her. Out here, she was nothing, which meant she had nothing left to lose. "You brought him to me because no one else would touch him," she said, her voice low and sharp. "So either trust me to do my job or carry him back out into that storm and let him die in the mud. Your choice." The soldiers exchanged glances. Then slowly they backed toward the door. "We'll be outside," the lead soldier said. "If you need anything, I won't." The door closed behind them with a soft click, and Sarah was alone with the man who had ruined her life. For a long moment, she just stood there, staring down at him. She could let him die, walk away, tell the soldiers she'd tried her best, but the poison was too advanced. No one would blame her. No one would even question it. But that wasn't who she was. Sarah Vance had become a healer because she believed in something bigger than revenge, bigger than bitterness. She believed that every life mattered, even the lives of those who had wronged her. She let out a slow breath and began to work. First, she checked his pulse. Rapid and uneven, his heart struggling to pump blood through veins choked with poison. Then she examined the entry wound, a deep gash on his left side, just below the ribs. The shadow creatures had clawed him open, injecting venom directly into his bloodstream. Shadow poison was unlike any other toxin. It didn't just attack the body, it attacked the spirit, the essence of a person's strength. For an alpha like Rowan, whose entire identity was built on control and dominance, it was the perfect weapon. The poison fed on his alpha nature, turning his own power against him. Standard healing wouldn't work. Potions, salves, even advanced Omega healing techniques, they would all fail because the poison adapted, mutated, resisted. There was only one method that had ever been documented as having a chance against shadow poison, and it had been banned by the kingdom 70 years ago. The resonance bond. It required an Omega healer to create a temporary psychic and physical link with an alpha patient, merging their life forces, their energies, their very beings, just long enough to isolate and purge the poison. But the risks were catastrophic. If the Omega's will wasn't strong enough, the poison would consume them both. If the alpha resisted, even subconsciously, the bond would shatter and kill the healer instantly. And there was another problem. The technique required absolute, unguarded trust between alpha and Omega. The alpha had to lower every defense, every instinct to dominate. The Omega had to open themselves completely, holding nothing back. It was the antithesis of everything the kingdom's hierarchy was built on. And it was Sarah's only option. She moved to the corner of the clinic where she kept her most carefully guarded supplies, the vials and components that predated the modern healing order, the ones passed down through her grandmother's line. Omega healers had once been the most powerful forces in the realm, before alphas restructured society and reduced them to assistants and vessels. Sarah pulled out a small glass vial filled with shimmering silver liquid, essence of moon veil, a rare plant that grew only in the deepest parts of the northern forests. Then a bundle of dried shadow root, ground fine. And finally, a thin silver needle, inscribed with runes so old that even Sarah didn't know their full meaning. She prepared the mixture with practiced hands, her mind already running through the steps of the ritual. She would need to apply the solution to both her skin and Rowan's, then use the needle to create a sympathetic link between their pulses. Once the bond formed, she would have to guide his consciousness through the poison, finding the core of the infection and burning it out. If it worked, he would live. If it didn't, they would both die screaming. Sarah finished the mixture and turned back to the table. Rowan's breathing had grown even more labored, his body trembling with fever. The black veins had spread further, creeping up his neck toward his jaw. She had minutes, maybe less. "Listen to me," Sarah said, leaning close to his ear. "I don't know if you can hear me, Commander, but if any part of you is still in there, You need to understand what's about to happen. I'm going to save your life, and you're going to hate every second of it." His eyelids fluttered, but he didn't respond. Sarah dipped her fingers into the silver solution and began tracing a pattern across Rowan's chest, over his heart, down his sternum, across the lines where the poison pulsed darkest. Then she repeated the pattern in her own skin, the liquid cold and electric against her palm. The moment the solution touched her, she felt it, a faint hum, like a string pulled taut between them. She picked up the silver needle. "Forgive me," she whispered, and then she pressed the needle into the pulse point on Rowan's wrist and into her own. The bond snapped into place like a thunderclap. Suddenly, Sarah wasn't just in her own body anymore. She was inside Rowan's mind, feeling his pain, his fever, his fear. She could feel the poison writhing through him like a living thing, hungry and vicious, tearing apart everything it touched. And beneath it all, she felt him, his alpha presence, strong and wild and defiant even in the face of death. But she also felt something else. Resistance. Rowan's instincts, even unconscious, were fighting her. His alpha nature recoiled from the idea of an omega inside his mind, inside his defenses. Every cell in his body screamed at him to push her out, to dominate, to protect himself. "Stop fighting me," Sarah hissed through gritted teeth, sweat beading on her forehead. "If you fight me, we both die." But he couldn't hear her, or maybe he could, and he just didn't care. The poison surged, sensing the bond, and it lunged towards Sarah with savage intent. She felt it latch onto her consciousness, cold and oily and suffocating. For a moment her vision went black. No, she wouldn't let it end like this. Sarah reached deeper than she ever had before, and pulled on a well of strength she'd buried 3 years ago. The part of herself that had once stood before kings and queens, that had healed wounds no one else could touch, that had been called a miracle worker before they called her a murderer. She pushed back. The poison recoiled, hissing. And in that moment of hesitation, Sarah drove forward, wrapping her will around the infection like a fist. She could feel Rowan's presence beside her now, his consciousness flickering in the dark. He was still fighting, still resisting. "Trust me," she whispered into the void. "Just this once, Rowan Cade. Trust me." And maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was instinct. Or maybe, buried beneath all that pride and armor, some part of him remembered who she had been before they destroyed her. His resistance wavered, just for a second, but it was enough. Sarah seized the opening and drove the full force of her healing into the heart of the poison. Light exploded through the bond, searing, purifying, absolute. The poison shrieked and thrashed, but it was too late. Sarah held on, burning it away piece by piece, until there was nothing left but ash. The bond shattered. Sarah gasped and stumbled back from the table, her legs giving out beneath her. She hit the floor hard, her vision swimming, her entire body trembling with exhaustion. On the table, Rowan Cade sucked in a ragged breath. The black veins were fading. He was alive. Sarah closed her eyes and let the darkness take her. When she woke, pale dawn light was filtering through the clinic windows. She was lying on the floor, a blanket draped over her shoulders. Her head pounded, and every muscle in her body felt like it had been wrung out and left to dry. She sat up slowly, wincing. Across the room, Rowan Cade was sitting upright on the examination table, his shirt still unbuttoned, the black veins completely gone. He was staring at his hands like he didn't quite believe they were his. And then he looked at her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Rowan's voice broke the silence. It was hoarse, rough, but unmistakably his. "You saved my life." Sarah leaned back against the wall, too tired to stand. "Don't sound so surprised, Commander. It's what I do. They said you were dangerous, that your methods were reckless. They said I killed a queen." His jaw tightened. "Did you?" Sarah met his gaze, unflinching. "No." Another silence. Rowan swung his legs off the table, testing his weight. He was weak, unsteady, but alive. "What did you do to me?" "I used a technique the kingdom banned because it requires an alpha to submit to an omega. You're welcome, by the way." His eyes narrowed. "I didn't submit to anyone." "No," Sarah said quietly. "But you stopped fighting, and that was enough." Rowan looked away, his expression unreadable. Outside, Sarah could hear the soldiers stirring, their voices low and tense. They would be coming in soon demanding answers, wanting to know how she'd done the impossible. But for now, in the fragile stillness of the early morning, there was only the disgraced healer and the Alpha Commander, bound together by a thread neither of them fully understood. And somewhere in the distance, in the shadows beyond Ashvale's borders, something dark and patient began to move. The storm was only beginning. The soldiers came in like a storm surge, their boots thundering against the clinic's worn floorboards. The lead soldier, a broad-shouldered alpha named Kane, stopped dead when he saw Rowan sitting upright, color returning to his face, the black veins of shadow poison completely gone. "Impossible," Kane breathed. Rowan's voice was still rough but steady. "Apparently not." The other soldiers crowded around the table, their expressions a mixture of awe and suspicion. One of them, a younger beta named Finn, kept glancing between Rowan and Sarah like he was trying to solve a puzzle that didn't make sense. A third soldier, a scarred woman named Margot, had her hand on her sword hilt, as if she expected Sarah to suddenly transform into a threat. "How did you do it?" Finn asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah pulled herself to her feet, using the wall for support. Her legs still felt like water, and the headache pounding behind her eyes suggested she'd burned through more energy than she should have. Every muscle in her body screamed in protest, and there was a hollow feeling in her chest, like she'd carved out a piece of herself and left it somewhere in the dark space between her mind and Rowan's. "Does it matter?" Sarah said, her voice even rougher than usual. "He's alive." "It matters," Kane said sharply, taking a step closer. His alpha presence filled the room, dominant, aggressive, demanding answers. "Because shadow poison doesn't just disappear. Every healer from here to the capital has tried and failed to cure it. Every single one. So either you're using forbidden methods, or what?" Sarah cut him off, her ruined voice hard as iron despite the exhaustion threatening to pull her under. "Or I'm a witch, a charlatan, a threat to the natural order? Pick your accusation, soldier." "I've heard them all before." Kane's jaw worked, his face flushing with anger. "You don't get to talk to me like that, Omega." "I'm not an Omega anymore," Sarah said flatly. "Your kingdom made sure of that when they stripped me of everything and threw me out here to rot. So don't you dare pull rank on me in my own clinic." The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. Margot's hand tightened on her sword, and Finn looked like he wanted to disappear into the floorboards. The miner whose hand Sarah had been treating before the soldiers arrived had already slipped out the back door, wanting no part of whatever was about to happen. Rowan swung his legs off the table, testing his balance. He was still weak. Sarah could see it in the way he gripped the table's edge, the slight tremor in his hands, the careful way he distributed his weight. But he was standing. That alone was a miracle that should have been impossible. "She used the resonance bond," Rowan said quietly, his eyes fixed on Kane. The room went silent. Even the wind outside seemed to pause, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Kane's face went from red to white in an instant. "That technique is forbidden. It's been banned for 70 years, Sarah finished, pushing off from the wall and forcing herself to stand straight despite the way her vision swam. "I'm aware of the law, soldier. Probably better than you are, considering I actually studied the old texts instead of just parroting what my commanders told me." "Then you know the penalty for using it," Margot said, her voice cold. "Execution. Immediate and without trial. The council was very clear when they banned it." Sarah laughed, a bitter sound that scraped out of her damaged throat like broken glass. "They already exiled me for a crime I didn't commit. They destroyed my name, my reputation, my life." "What more can they take?" "Your life," Kane said flatly. "That's what they can take. And they will, the moment they find out what you've done here." "She saved mine," Rowan interjected, his voice carrying the weight of command that came from years of leading men into battle. "That's all that matters." "With respect, Commander, that's not all that matters." Kane's voice was tense, almost pleading. "The resonance bond creates a link between Alpha and Omega that—" He hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with what he was about to say. "That violates the natural order. It forces an Alpha to submit, to open their defenses completely to an Omega. It's dangerous, unnatural. It goes against everything our society is built on." "Unnatural," Sarah repeated, her voice dripping with contempt. She moved closer to Kane, ignoring the way Margot's sword whispered partway out of its sheath. Tell me, soldier, what's natural about letting a man die when you have the skill to save him? What's natural about a hierarchy that values pride over life? What's natural about a system that would rather see its greatest warriors rot in the ground than allow an Omega to prove she's more than a vessel for alpha pleasure? Kane's face flushed again. You're twisting. I'm telling the truth. Something your precious counsel wouldn't recognize if it bit them. Enough, Rowan said, his voice sharp enough to cut through the argument. He was leaning heavily on the table now, his strength clearly waning, but his presence was still absolute. Kane, you brought me here because you knew I was dying. You went against orders to do it. Don't pretend you care about protocol now that it's inconvenient. Kane opened his mouth, then closed it. His shoulders sagged slightly. The Council is going to want answers, Commander. When they find out you survived, when they find out how, they're going to send investigators. Maybe worse. Let them come, Sarah said. I've got nothing left to lose. Before anyone could respond, the clinic door burst open again. This time it was a young girl, maybe 12 years old, her clothes mud-stained and torn, her face streaked with tears and dirt. She stumbled inside, gasping for breath, her small chest heaving. Healer Vance, she cried. You have to come. You have to come right now. It's my father. He's hurt bad, and there's blood everywhere, and... She stopped mid-sentence when she saw the soldiers, her eyes going wide with fear. Children in the outer districts learned early to be wary of uniformed men. Soldiers meant taxes, conscription, trouble. Sarah moved toward her instinctively, her healer's instincts overriding everything else. She knelt down, ignoring the protest from her exhausted body, and put her hands on the girl's shoulders. Slow down, Sarah said gently. Take a breath. Tell me what happened. The girl swallowed hard, fighting back tears. There was a collapse in the northern mine shaft. The support beams gave way and everything it all came down. My father and 6 others were working the deep tunnel. They got 2 men out already, but one of them, Mr. Garrett, he's bleeding everywhere and he won't wake up. And my mama said to get you because you're the only healer who... Where is he? Sarah asked, already moving toward her medical bag. The tavern. They carried him there because it was closer than here. Please, Healer Vance, my papa's still down there, and if Mr. Garrett dies... He's not going to die, Sarah said firmly, though she had no way of knowing if that was true. She grabbed her medical bag, checking quickly to make sure she had the basics. Clean cloth, needle and thread, willow bark for pain, yarrow to stop bleeding. Lead the way. Healer Vance, Kane said sharply, stepping to block her path. You're not going anywhere until we settle this matter of... Get out of my way. Kane didn't move. I have orders to... Let her go, Rowan said, his voice quiet but absolute. Kane turned to him, incredulous. Commander, she just admitted to using forbidden techniques. We can't just... I said let her go. The 2 alphas locked eyes. The air in the room seemed to crackle with tension, 2 dominant forces colliding, neither willing to back down. Sarah had seen this before, these alpha pissing contests that men seemed to think were more important than people's lives. For a moment, she thought Kane might actually challenge him. His hand moved to his sword, and Margot shifted her weight, ready to back up her commander. Finn looked like he wanted to be anywhere else in the world. But then Kane's shoulders sagged, and he stepped aside. Whatever authority Rowan held, even weakened and barely recovered, it was still greater than Kane's willingness to fight. Sarah didn't wait for them to change their minds. She took the girl's hand and followed her out into the gray morning, leaving the soldiers and their accusations behind. The streets of Asheville were already stirring with the news of the mine collapse. Miners who'd been sleeping off the night shift were stumbling out of their homes, pulling on boots and jackets, heading north to help with the rescue. Women gathered in tight clusters, whispering prayers and fears, their faces drawn with worry. Children watched from doorways, too young to help but old enough to understand that something terrible had happened. The girl, her name was Ellie, she gasped out between breaths, led Sarah through the winding streets at a near run. Sarah's body protested every step, her muscles still weak from the resonance bond, but she pushed through it. She'd learned long ago how to function on empty, how to keep moving when everything in her screamed to stop. The tavern was chaos, A crowd had gathered outside, maybe 40 or 50 people, miners and their families pressing close, their voices a cacophony of fear and anger. Someone was shouting about negligence, about how the mine owners had ignored warnings about the shaft's instability. Someone else was crying. A fight had broken out near the edge of the crowd. Two men shoving each other, their tempers frayed by fear and exhaustion. Sarah pushed through them, her healer's bag held high. "Move! Let me through!" The crowd parted reluctantly. Inside, the air was thick and hot despite the cold morning, stinking of blood and unwashed bodies and the sour smell of spilled beer. They'd cleared the tables from the center of the room and laid the injured man, Garrett, on one of the long serving tables, his clothes soaked through with red. Sarah's heart sank the moment she saw him. Garrett was a good man, a hard worker, someone who'd never given her trouble despite her reputation. He had a wife and 3 children, and right now he was dying. She pushed through to the table, her healer's instincts taking over. She could see the problem immediately. A deep laceration across his abdomen, likely from a falling beam or sharp debris. The wound was jagged, ugly, and deep enough that she could see layers of muscle and tissue beneath. He'd lost a lot of blood. Too much. His clothes were drenched with it, and more pooled on the table beneath him. His breathing was shallow and rapid, his skin pale and clammy. "Clear the room," Sarah ordered, her voice cutting through the noise. "Everyone out except—" She pointed to 2 of the burliest miners standing nearby. "You and you. I need you to hold him steady if he starts thrashing." The crowd hesitated, unwilling to leave. These were Garrett's friends, his neighbors, people who'd worked beside him in the mines for years. "Now!" Sarah's voice cracked like a whip, and they scattered, filing out through the doors and leaving her alone with the patient and her 2 assistants. She set her bag on a nearby chair and rolled up her sleeves. Her hands were shaking slightly, from exhaustion, from the aftermath of the bond, from the sheer amount of blood she was looking at, but she forced them steady. She'd done this before. She could do it again. "What's your name?" she asked one of the miners. "Brock," the man said. He was older, probably in his 50s, with arms like tree trunks and a face weathered by years underground. "And you?" "Thomas," said the other, younger and leaner but still strong. "Good. Brock, I need you to keep pressure on this wound, hard pressure. Don't let up no matter what. Thomas, get me clean water and every clean cloth in this place. Move." They obeyed without question. Sarah worked quickly, cleaning the wound as best she could, applying pressure to slow the bleeding. The laceration was deep but clean. No signs of infection yet, though that would change quickly if she didn't close it soon. The deeper she probed, the worse it looked. The wound had sliced through muscle and nicked what looked like part of his intestine. This was bad. This was surgery-level bad, and she didn't have the tools or the energy for surgery right now. But she had to try. She threaded a needle with practiced hands and began stitching, starting with the deepest layers and working her way out. Her fingers moved with mechanical precision, each stitch placed exactly where it needed to be. Garrett groaned beneath her hands, his eyes fluttering open. "Am I dying?" he whispered, his voice weak. "Not if I have anything to say about it," Sarah muttered, pulling another stitch tight. "Stay still and stay quiet. I need to concentrate." She was halfway through closing the wound when she felt it, a shift in the air, a wrongness that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. It was subtle at first, just a faint prickling sensation, like the moment before lightning strikes. But it grew stronger with each passing second, a sense of something dark and hungry moving just beyond the edge of perception. She'd felt this before, years ago, in the palace. Right before the queen had— "Everyone get back!" Sarah shouted suddenly, jerking away from the table. The miners stared at her in confusion. "What? Why?" And then Garrett screamed. Black veins erupted across his skin, spreading from the wound like cracks in ice. They moved fast, faster than Sarah had ever seen shadow poison spread, racing across his chest, up his neck, down his arms. His back arched, his muscles seizing, his body convulsing with such violence that Brock and Thomas had to throw their full weight on him to keep him on the table. "No," Sarah whispered, stumbling backward. "No, that's not possible." But it was happening right in front of her. Garrett's eyes rolled back in his head, showing only whites. Foam flecked his lips. The black veins pulsed beneath his skin like living things, writhing and spreading with horrible purpose. Shadow poison. "What's happening to him?" Thomas shouted, his voice cracking with panic. Sarah's mind raced. Shadow poison didn't just appear randomly. It required direct contact with shadow creatures, and those creatures hadn't been seen this far south in decades. The last confirmed sighting had been nearly 40 years ago in the northern wastes. Unless they were here now. The tavern door slammed open with enough force to crack the frame, and Cain burst inside, his sword already drawn, his face pale. Margot and Finn were right behind him, weapons out, eyes wild. "We need to evacuate," Cain barked. "Right now. Everyone out." "What's going on?" Sarah demanded. "Shadow creatures, at least a dozen of them, coming from the north. They hit the mine site first, killed 3 men trying to rescue the trapped miners. They'll be here in minutes." The room erupted into panic. Brock and Thomas released Garrett and ran for the exits. The few people still lingering in the tavern scrambled over each other trying to get out. Sarah could hear screaming outside now, people running, mothers calling for their children. She stood frozen, staring down at Garrett's convulsing form. The black veins had covered almost his entire body now, and his screams had turned into something worse, a wet gurgling sound that meant his throat was closing. She could try the resonance bond again. It had worked on Rowan. It might work on Garrett, but she was already dangerously depleted from the first attempt. Her energy reserves were running on fumes, her body barely holding together. Attempting the bond a second time in her current state could kill her. And even if she survived the attempt, even if she managed to form the connection, there was no guarantee it would work on someone this far gone. Garrett's infection was spreading faster than Rowan's had, the poison more aggressive, more virulent. But if she didn't try, Garrett would die. And if the shadow creatures were coming, if they were really here in Ashvale, then everyone else in this town might follow. Rowan appeared at her side, somehow having made it across town despite his weakened state. His face was drawn, pale, but his eyes were clear and focused. "Sarah, we need to go, now." "I can't leave him." "You can't save him." "Not like this. Not now." Sarah's hands tightened into fists. "I won't let him die. If you try the bond again, you'll kill yourself. I felt what it did to you. You're running on empty, and then no one will be able to stop what's coming." She knew he was right. She hated that he was right. But knowing something and accepting it were two different things. "There has to be another way," she said, her voice breaking. "There has to be—" The windows exploded inward. Glass shattered everywhere, glittering in the dim light like deadly snow. The shadow creatures came through in a wave of darkness and fury, their bodies seeming to pour through the broken windows like liquid smoke given terrible form. They were massive, easily the size of war horses, wolf-like beasts with bodies that seemed to be made of living shadow. Their forms were barely solid, constantly shifting and reforming, as if they couldn't quite decide what shape to take. Their eyes burned red like coals, and when they opened their mouths, Sarah could see rows of teeth that looked like they'd been carved from obsidian. They moved with terrifying speed, flowing across the tavern floor like a flash flood. The few miners who hadn't escaped in time were cut down in seconds, the creature's claws tearing through flesh like it was paper. Blood sprayed across the walls in arterial spurts. Screams filled the air, wet and horrible, and cut short. Rowan shoved Sarah behind him, his sword appearing in his hand as if by magic. He was still weak, still recovering, his movements not quite as fast or as sure as they should have been. But he moved like the warrior he was, precise, efficient, deadly. He cut down the first creature that lunged for them, his blade passing through its neck. The creature's head dissolved into smoke, and its body followed a heartbeat later, leaving nothing behind but a faint smell of sulfur. But there were too many. Cain and his soldiers fought their way inside, forming a defensive line near the door. Margot moved like a dancer, her blade flashing as she cut down one creature after another. Finn was less skilled but made up for it with raw determination, his sword work brutal and effective. Cain fought at the center, his alpha presence blazing like a beacon, coordinating the defense. But the creatures kept coming. For everyone they killed, 2 more seemed to take its place, pouring in through the windows and the door like an endless tide of darkness. Sarah grabbed a scalpel from her medical bag. It was a pitiful weapon, barely longer than her hand, but it was all she had. A shadow creature broke through the line and lunged at her, its claws extended, its red eyes fixed on her throat. She slashed wildly, the scalpel passing harmlessly through the creature's smoke-like body. The blade might as well have been made of air. The creature's claws raked across her shoulder, tearing through her shirt and the flesh beneath. Pain exploded through her arm, white-hot and blinding. She screamed and stumbled backward, blood already soaking through her clothes. Rowan spun, abandoning his current opponent to drive his sword through the creature's head. It dissolved instantly, but not before leaving 3 deep gashes across Sarah's left arm. "Get her out of here!" Rowan shouted to Kane. "I'm not leaving!" Sarah yelled back, clutching her bleeding arm. The pain was intense, radiating up into her shoulder and down to her fingertips, but she could still move. She could still fight. And then she saw it. Garrett, still on the table, his body now completely covered in black veins. But he wasn't convulsing anymore. He was sitting up. And his eyes were glowing the same burning red as the creature's. "Rowan," Sarah said quietly, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Look." Everyone in the room seemed to freeze for a heartbeat, all eyes turning to the table. Garrett rose slowly, his movements wrong somehow, too fluid, too graceful, like a puppet being controlled by invisible strings. The shadow creatures stopped attacking, turning toward him in perfect unison, like soldiers awaiting orders from their commander. When Garrett spoke, his voice was wrong. It was layered, echoing as if multiple beings were speaking at once through his mouth. The sound made Sarah's skin crawl. "The healer," the thing wearing Garrett's body said, its red eyes fixed directly on Sarah. "She disrupted the awakening. She broke the thread. She must be brought to the master. Alive." "Over my dead body," Rowan growled, raising his sword. The Garrett thing smiled, revealing teeth that were too sharp, too many, arranged in rows like a shark's mouth. "That can be arranged, Commander." It lunged. The speed was inhuman, impossible. One moment Garrett was standing by the table. The next he was airborne, claws extended, moving like a bolt of black lightning. Rowan met him head-on, their collision shaking the entire tavern. Tables splintered. The floor cracked. They traded blows with brutal efficiency. Rowan soared against Garrett's claws, steel against shadow. But Rowan was still weakened from the poison. Sarah could see it in every movement, every parry that came a fraction too slow, every strike that lacked his usual power. He was running on willpower and training, but his body was failing him. The Garrett thing seemed to sense it. Its attacks grew more aggressive, more targeted, pressing the advantage. Rowan blocked, dodged, countered, but he was being driven back step by step. And then the creature found an opening. Its claws flashed out, too fast to see, and raked across Rowan's chest. 4 parallel gashes opened up, blood pouring from the wounds. Rowan staggered back, his sword dipping, his face going pale. No, not again. Not him. Something inside Sarah snapped. All the fear, all the exhaustion, all the pain, it crystallized into a single point of white-hot fury. She didn't think, she didn't plan, she just moved. She threw herself forward past Rowan's weakening guard and placed both hands on Garrett's back, and she reached for the bond. It was reckless. It was suicidal. She was already running on empty, her energy reserves depleted to almost nothing. The first bond had taken everything she had. Attempting a second one in her current state was the kind of mistake that healers wrote cautionary tales about, but she had to try. The bond formed, fragile and unstable, like a bridge made of spider silk stretched across a chasm. Sarah plunged into Garrett's consciousness, and what she found there made her want to scream. Garrett was still inside, trapped beneath layers of shadow poison and something else, something foreign and malevolent. It wrapped around his mind like chains forged from darkness itself, controlling him, twisting him, turning him into a puppet dancing on strings of shadow. And beyond Garrett, deeper in the connection, Sarah felt them, all of them. Every shadow creature in Ashvale, connected through the same dark network like nodes in a web, all linked back to a single source somewhere far away. A voice spoke in her mind, cold and amused and terribly, horribly familiar. "Foolish Omega, did you really think you could heal what was meant to be transformed?" Sarah's blood ran cold. She recognized that voice. She'd heard it before years ago in the palace healing halls, in the quiet hours of the night when she'd been studying ancient texts, in the moments before the queen had died. "Draven," she whispered into the void. Laughter echoed through the bond, reverberating through her skull like thunder. Very good, my dear student. I wondered how long it would take you to figure it out. Come find me, little healer. Come see what your precious kingdom has driven me to create. Come see what real power looks like when it's no longer bound by their pathetic rules. You did this, Sarah said, her voice shaking with rage. You killed the queen. You framed me. You created these abominations. I liberated them, Draven corrected, his voice patient, as if explaining something to a slow child. The shadow creatures are not abominations, Sarah. They are evolution. They are what we all could be if we stopped clinging to this ridiculous hierarchy, this artificial separation between Alpha and Omega. I'm creating a new order. And you're going to help me. I'll die first. No, you won't, because if you die, so does Commander Cade. So does everyone in Ashvale. So does everyone in the next town, and the next, and the next. I have hundreds of seeds planted throughout the kingdom, Sarah. Hundreds of people carrying the transformation inside them, waiting to awaken. And the only person who can stop it is you. The bond shattered, exploding outward with enough force to throw Sarah across the room. She hit the wall hard, her vision going white with pain, her ears ringing. When her sight cleared, she saw the shadow creatures retreating, flowing back out through the windows and doors like smoke being sucked through a chimney. They dragged Garrett's body with them, his unconscious form disappearing into the morning mist as quickly as they'd appeared. Rowan was at her side instantly, his hands pressing against her shoulders, his face swimming in and out of focus above her. Sarah, stay with me. Don't you dare. She tried to speak, but her voice wouldn't work. The exhaustion was too deep, too complete. She'd pushed herself past every limit, burned through every reserve, and now there was nothing left. The world was tilting, spinning, fading to black at the edges. The last thing she saw before the darkness took her was Rowan's face, streaked with blood and something that might have been fear. And the last thing she thought was that Draven Holt, her former mentor, the man who had taught her everything she knew about healing, the man she'd once admired more than anyone in the world, was behind all of this. He'd killed the queen. He'd framed her. He'd created an army of shadow creatures. And he wanted her alive. The question was, why? She woke to firelight and whispered arguments. Sarah's eyes cracked open slowly, her vision blurry and unfocused. Her entire body felt like it had been dragged behind a horse for miles, every muscle aching, every nerve raw and exposed. The wounded shoulder throbbed with a deep, pulsing pain that made her stomach turn. She was lying on something soft, a bed. Not her clinic bed with its thin, worn mattress, but something better. Clean sheets, a real pillow. The air smelled of wood smoke and herbs, yarrow and comfrey, the kind used for treating wounds and preventing infection. Voices drifted from somewhere nearby. Angry voices, kept low but sharp with tension. Cannot stay here. You know what they'll say when they find out what she did? What she is. That was Cain. Sarah would recognize that clipped, authoritative tone anywhere. She saved my life. Rowan's voice rough but firm. Twice now. And used forbidden techniques to do it. The council will demand her head. They'll demand all our heads for harboring her. The council isn't here, we are. And right now, she's the only person who understands what we're facing. What we're facing is a disaster. Garrett's gone. Transformed into one of those things. 3 more miners are dead. Half the town is talking about abandoning Ashvale completely, and the other half wants to burn the healer at the stake for bringing this curse down on us. Sarah tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Pain lanced through her shoulder and her head swam with dizziness. She gasped, the sound escaping before she could stop it. The voices went silent. Footsteps approached quickly, and then Rowan was there, his hand on her uninjured shoulder, pressing her gently but firmly back down. Don't move, he said. You've lost a lot of blood. Sarah blinked up at him, trying to focus. He looked better than he had in the tavern, still pale, still moving carefully, but alive and conscious and whole. Someone had cleaned the blood from his face and bandaged the wounds on his chest. He was wearing a simple linen shirt, unbuttoned at the collar, and she could see clean white bandages wrapped around his torso. Where am I? Her voice came out as barely more than a whisper, her damaged throat even worse than usual. My quarters. What passes for them, anyway? Rowan gestured around the room. It was small, sparse. A bed, a table, a single chair, a fireplace. Military simple. The clinic was destroyed in the attack. This was the best option. Sarah's heart sank. My clinic, the front half is gone. Creatures tore through it after you collapsed. We managed to save some of your supplies, but he trailed off, his expression grim. 3 years. 3 years she'd spent building that clinic from nothing, treating patients no one else would touch, carving out a small corner of purpose in this frozen wasteland. And now it was gone. Kane appeared in her line of sight, his face hard. You're awake. Good. We need answers. Kane, Rowan warned. No, Commander. She needs to hear this. Kane moved closer, looming over the bed. His alpha presence was oppressive, designed to intimidate. The people are scared. They're angry. They saw what happened in that tavern. They saw Garrett turn into a monster, saw those creatures dragging him away, and they know you touched him right before it happened. Sarah's blood ran cold.
They think I did that to him? What else are they supposed to think? The shadow creatures didn't show up until after you arrived in Ashvale. The queen died under your care. Now Garrett's transformed and 3 men are dead. Kane's voice was hard, unforgiving. You can see how it looks. I was trying to save him, Sarah said, forcing the words through her damaged throat. The poison was already in him. I tried to stop it by using the same forbidden technique you used on the commander, a technique that creates an unnatural bond between Alpha and Omega. Kane leaned closer. Tell me, healer, what did you see when you touched Garrett's mind? Sarah's hands clenched in the sheets. She could still feel it, the echo of that connection. Draven's voice, the network of shadow creatures, the terrible creeping realization of just how deep this conspiracy went. I saw the person controlling them, she said quietly. The one who created the shadow poison. Who's been spreading it throughout the kingdom? Rowan straightened. Who? Sarah met his eyes. Master Healer Draven Holt, my former mentor. The silence that followed was absolute. Kane recovered first. Draven Holt? The Draven Holt? The head of the Royal Healing Council? Former head, Sarah corrected bitterly. He disappeared 6 months after the Queen died. The council said he'd gone into seclusion to grieve. But I heard him today, through the bond. He's been experimenting with shadow poison, transforming people. He said he has hundreds of seeds planted throughout the kingdom, hundreds of people carrying the infection, waiting to transform. That's insane, Kane said flatly. Draven Holt is one of the most respected healers in the kingdom. He's served the crown for 30 years. Why would he? Because he's tired of the hierarchy, Sarah said, pushing herself up on her elbows despite the pain. Because he thinks the separation between alphas and omegas makes us weak. He wants to create something new, something that transcends the old order. By turning people into monsters? By transforming them, Sarah said. That's how he sees it. Evolution, not corruption. Rowan was pacing now, his hand on the hilt of his sword. If what you're saying is true, then this isn't just about Ashvale. This is an attack on the entire kingdom. It's worse than that, Sarah said. She took a shaky breath, marshaling her strength. He wants me. Specifically, me. He said, I'm the only one who can stop the transformations from spreading. Then your leverage, Kane said immediately. If he wants you, we can use that. Draw him out, set a trap. Or he's telling the truth, Rowan interrupted. And she really is the only one who can stop this. Sarah nodded slowly. The resonance bond. It's the only technique powerful enough to break through the shadow poison once it's taken hold. But it requires an Omega healer with enough strength to withstand the corruption. There aren't many of us left who know the old techniques. Most were forced to give them up when the council banned them. How convenient for Draven, Rowan muttered. Eliminate the competition, then unleash a plague only they could cure. Before anyone could respond, the door burst open. Margot stood there, her face flushed, her hand on her sword. Commander, we have a situation. What now? The townsfolk, they're gathering outside, demanding to see the healer. Kane cursed under his breath. How many? 30, maybe 40? More coming. They're armed, Commander. Pitchforks, mining picks, a few swords. They're saying she brought the curse, that she needs to leave or they'll make her leave. Sarah's stomach dropped. She'd faced angry mobs before.
in the capital, when they'd accused her of killing the queen. She still had nightmares about the screaming crowds, the stones they'd thrown, the hatred burning in their eyes. "Tell them she's under military protection," Rowan said sharply. "Anyone who tries to get past you answers to me." "That might not be enough, sir. They're scared, and scared people do stupid things." Rowan's jaw tightened. He looked at Sarah, then at Kane. "Get her on her feet. We're leaving." "What?" Sarah tried to sit up fully and immediately regretted it. Her vision swam, black spots dancing at the edges. "You can't travel like this," Kane protested. "She's barely conscious. She'll never make it to the capital." "We're not going to the capital," Rowan said. "We're going north, to the old healing monastery." Sarah's head snapped up despite the pain. "The monastery was abandoned 50 years ago. It's in ruins." "The building is in ruins, but the archives might still be intact. If Draven's using old techniques, old methods, then maybe we can find something there that tells us how to stop him, or at least how to fight back." "That's a 4-day journey through hostile territory," Kane said. "And that's if the weather holds and we don't run into shadow creatures every mile." "You have a better idea?" Kane opened his mouth, then closed it. He didn't. The sound of angry voices was growing louder outside. Someone was chanting now, the words indistinct but the tone unmistakable. Mob mentality spreading like wildfire. Rowan helped Sarah to her feet, his arm around her waist, supporting most of her weight. She wanted to protest, to insist she could walk on her own, but the truth was she could barely stand. The room tilted dangerously, and she had to close her eyes and focus on breathing to keep from passing out again. "Margot," Rowan called, "get the horses ready. Supplies for a week. Medical equipment if you can salvage any from the clinic." "Yes, sir." "Finn, I need you to create a distraction. Get the crowd's attention focused on the east side of the compound. We'll slip out the north gate." The young soldier nodded and disappeared. Kane was gathering weapons, swords, daggers, a crossbow. "This is a mistake, Commander. We should send a messenger to the capital, get reinforcements, a proper military response. But by the time reinforcements arrive, Ashvale will be overrun. And if Draven has seeds planted throughout the kingdom, like Sarah says, then every town between here and the capital is a potential threat." Rowan's voice was hard, final. "We move now. We move fast. And we find a way to stop this before it spreads any further." Outside, the chanting had resolved into words now, clear and terrible. "Burn the witch! Burn the witch! Burn the witch!" Sarah closed her eyes. Same words, different mob. History repeating itself in an endless bitter cycle. They moved through the back corridors of the military compound, Rowan half carrying Sarah, Kane leading the way with his sword drawn. The compound was small, just a handful of buildings clustered around a central courtyard, designed to house a small garrison watching over the mining district. They reached the north gate just as they heard glass breaking somewhere behind them. The mob had breached the compound. Finn's distraction clearly hadn't worked as well as hoped. 3 horses waited outside, already saddled. Margot was there, loading supplies into saddlebags with practiced efficiency. She looked up as they approached. "They're coming through the main hall," she reported. "We've got maybe 2 minutes." Rowan lifted Sarah onto one of the horses. She swayed dangerously, gripping the saddle horn with white knuckles. He swung up behind her, his arm wrapping around her waist to keep her steady. "Can you ride?" he asked quietly. "Do I have a choice?" "Not really." Kane and Margot mounted their own horses. Finn came sprinting around the corner, his face flushed. "They're inside! Go, go!" They rode hard into the gray morning, the sound of angry voices fading behind them. Sarah held on, her body pressed back against Rowan's chest, every jarring step of the horse sending fresh waves of pain through her wounded shoulder. The landscape around Ashvale was bleak. Rolling hills of scrub grass and scattered rocks, everything brown and dead under the winter sky. To the north, dark mountains loomed, their peaks lost in clouds. That was where they were headed. Into the wilderness, into the places even the frontier folk avoided. They rode for hours, pushing the horses as hard as they dared. Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness, her body unable to maintain the effort of staying alert. Each time she woke, Rowan's arm was still there, steady and sure, keeping her from falling. By the time they finally stopped to rest, the sun was high overhead, though its light was thin and weak. They'd left the last traces of civilization behind hours ago. Now there was nothing but wilderness, rocky terrain, twisted scrub trees, and the ever-present wind that cut through clothing like knives. Margot helped Sarah down from the horse while Rowan dismounted. Sarah's legs nearly gave out the moment her feet touched the ground, and Margot had to support her weight. "We need to check your wounds," Margot said, her voice gentler than Sarah had heard it before. "That shoulder's still bleeding." They set up a makeshift camp in the lee of a large boulder that blocked some of the wind. Kane tended to the horses while Margot unwrapped Sarah's shoulder bandages. The wounds were ugly. 3 parallel gashes from the shadow creature's claws, each about 6 inches long and deep enough to show muscle. The edges were inflamed, angry red, and when Margot probed carefully, Sarah hissed in pain. "It's infected," Margot said flatly. "Starting to, anyway. We need to clean this properly, or you'll lose the arm." "I'll do it," Sarah said, reaching for her medical bag with her good hand. But Margot pushed it away. "You're in no shape to treat yourself. Let me." There was something in the soldier's tone that made Sarah pause. Not quite kindness, but not hostility either. Something in between. Respect, maybe? Or at least acknowledgement. Margot worked efficiently, cleaning the wounds with water and whiskey, applying a poultice of yarrow and comfrey that burned like fire but would fight the infection. Sarah gritted her teeth through it, refusing to cry out. "You saved the commander's life," Margot said quietly as she worked. "Twice. Whatever else you are, whatever the council says about you, you're a healer, a real one. Not many people would have done what you did." "I couldn't let him die," Sarah said simply. "Why not? He voted to exile you. He stood before the council and called you dangerous." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "Because letting people die out of spite would make me the monster they already think I am." Margot tied off the fresh bandages and sat back. "The townsfolk, they're terrified. That's why they turned on you. It's not rational, it's not fair, but it's real. Fear makes people cruel." "I know. Do you?" Margot's eyes were sharp. "Do you really understand how much danger you're in? Not just from the shadow creatures or from Draven, from everyone. The council will want you dead for using forbidden techniques. The people will want you dead for bringing the curse. Even the soldiers, most of them think you should be executed just to be safe." She paused. "The only reason you're still alive is because Commander Cade won't allow it, but even he has limits to his authority." Sarah looked across the camp to where Rowan was conferring with Kane, their voices low. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you need to understand what's at stake, and because—" Margot hesitated, then continued. "Because I had a sister. She was an Omega. Gentle, kind, everything an Omega was supposed to be according to the council. She got sick when she was 16, a wasting disease, they called it. The royal healers said there was nothing they could do. She died slowly, painfully, over the course of a year." Her voice went hard. "Later, I found out there was a treatment, an old Omega healing technique that might have saved her, but it had been banned because it required alpha blood. The hierarchy was more important than my sister's life." "I'm sorry," Sarah said quietly. "Don't be sorry. Just survive. And if you really can, stop whatever Draven's planning. Do it. Make all this mean something." Before Sarah could respond, Rowan called out, "We need to move. Storm's coming." Sure enough, dark clouds were building on the northern horizon, moving fast. Within minutes, the first drops of rain began to fall, cold and stinging. They mounted up again, Sarah once more sharing a horse with Rowan, and pushed on into the growing storm. The rain turned to sleet, then to snow. The temperature dropped rapidly, and the wind picked up until it was howling through the rocks like a living thing. Visibility shrank to almost nothing. The horses struggled through deepening drifts, their breath steaming in the frigid air. "We need shelter," Kane shouted over the wind. "The horses can't take much more of this." Rowan pointed ahead. "There. Those rocks. Looks like a cave system." They dismounted and led the horses toward what did indeed appear to be the mouth of a cave, dark and unwelcoming, but at least out of the wind. Rowan went in first, sword drawn, checking for occupants, animal or otherwise. When he emerged and nodded, they quickly got the horses inside and began setting up camp. The cave was shallow, but dry, with enough room for the horses and the 4 of them. Kane got a fire going while Margot saw to the animals. Sarah sat with her back against the cave wall, shivering uncontrollably despite the blanket Rowan had wrapped around her shoulders. She was so tired. Bone-deep tired, the kind that made every thought feel like wading through mud. Her shoulder throbbed with every heartbeat, and despite Margot's treatment, she could feel the infection spreading, a deep, hot ache that promised fever soon. But more than the physical exhaustion, it was the weight of everything pressing down on her. Draven's betrayal, the Queen's death, 3 years of exile, the mob in Ashvale, Garrett's transformation, the network of poison spreading through the kingdom, and underneath it all, a question that had haunted her since the day they'd exiled her. Why? Why had Draven done this? He'd been her mentor, her teacher, the closest thing to a father figure she'd ever had. He taught her everything, not just healing techniques, but how to think, how to question, how to see beyond the rigid hierarchies the kingdom enforced. She'd trusted him completely, and he'd destroyed her. "You should eat something," Rowan said, sitting down beside her and offering a piece of dried meat. Sarah shook her head. "Not hungry." "Eat anyway. You need your strength." She took the meat mechanically, chewing without tasting. Rowan watched her with those steady, dark eyes that seemed to see more than she wanted them to. "What did he say to you?" Rowan asked quietly. "Draven, in the bond." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "That he's creating a new order. That the hierarchy between alphas and omegas is artificial, destructive. That he's liberating people by transforming them. By turning them into monsters. He doesn't see them as monsters. He sees them as evolution, as transcendence." Rowan's jaw tightened. "And the people who don't want to be transcended? Who just want to live their lives? I don't think he cares anymore. If he ever did." Sarah pulled the blanket tighter. "He said I'm the only one who can stop it, the transformations, that I'm the key. Because of the resonance bond. Because I'm one of the last Omega healers who knows the old techniques. Most of us were forced to abandon them when the council banned them. But my grandmother, she taught me in secret, made me memorize everything before she died. She said the knowledge was too important to lose, even if using it meant death. And now that knowledge is the only thing standing between the kingdom and whatever Draven's planning." Sarah looked at him. "You don't have to do this, you know. Help me. You've already repaid whatever debt you think you owe. You could go back to the capital, report what you know, let the council handle it." Rowan was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. "The day I voted to exile you," he said finally, "I believed I was doing the right thing. The evidence seemed clear. The Queen died under your care. The techniques you'd used were forbidden. The council said you were dangerous, and I trusted their judgment. And now? Now I've felt what you can do. I've seen it. And I'm starting to understand that maybe the council's judgment isn't as sound as I thought." He looked at her. "You saved my life twice using techniques they call abominations. You tried to save Garrett knowing it might kill you. You're the only person who seems to actually understand what we're facing. So, no, I'm not going back to the capital. I'm seeing this through." Before Sarah could respond, Margot called out from the cave entrance. "Movement! Multiple contacts coming from the south!" Everyone was on their feet instantly. Rowan drew his sword. Kane readied his crossbow. Sarah struggled to stand, her wounded shoulder screaming in protest. Through the swirling snow, shapes began to emerge. Human shapes, moving in formation, too organized to be random travelers. "Soldiers," Kane said, his voice tense. "At least a dozen. Royal colors." Sarah's blood ran cold. "They're here for me." The soldiers emerged from the storm like ghosts, their armor marked with the crown's insignia. They formed a semicircle around the cave entrance, blocking any escape. Their leader stepped forward, a tall alpha with silver hair and a face like carved stone. "Commander Rowan Cade," the man said, his voice carrying easily over the wind. "By order of the Royal Council, you are to surrender the Omega healer Sarah Vance for crimes against the Crown. Failure to comply will be considered treason." Rowan stepped forward, placing himself between Sarah and the soldiers. "On whose authority?" "Master Healer Draven Holt, acting head of the Royal Council in the King's absence." Sarah's mind reeled. Draven was back, and he'd taken control of the council. "Draven Holt is a traitor," Rowan said flatly. "He's the one behind the shadow creatures,
behind the poison spreading through the kingdom. The silver-haired commander's expression didn't change. That's a serious accusation, Commander Cade. Do you have proof? The healer has seen him, through the bond. He admitted, the word of a disgraced exile using forbidden techniques? The commander's voice was cold. That's not proof. That's desperation. Then come with us to the monastery, Rowan said. Help us investigate. If we find evidence of Draven's involvement, my orders are to retrieve the healer, not to chase conspiracy theories through the wilderness. The commander's hand moved to his sword. Last chance, Cade, stand down. Rowan's grip tightened on his weapon. No. The tension was electric. Sarah could see it building, see the moment crystallizing. In seconds, this would turn into a bloodbath. She stepped forward past Rowan, ignoring his hissed warning. Wait, she said, her ruined voice carrying across the space. I'll go with you. Sarah, no. If I don't, they'll kill all of you, and then Draven wins anyway. She looked at the silver-haired commander. I'll surrender on one condition. You're in no position to make demands. I am, if you want me alive. Sarah's voice was steady, despite the fear churning in her gut. Let Commander Cade and his soldiers go. They were following my orders, trying to protect me. If anyone's committed treason, it's me. Let them go, and I'll come peacefully. The commander studied her for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded. Agreed. Commander Cade, you and your soldiers are free to return to your posts. The healer will come with us. Like hell she will, Rowan growled. Sarah turned to face him, meeting his eyes. Please, trust me. Trust you to walk into a trap? To let them take you back to Draven? Trust that I know what I'm doing. She could see the war playing out behind his eyes, duty against instinct, military discipline against something else, something newer and more complicated. The bond they'd formed hadn't completely dissolved. She could still feel it, a faint thread connecting them, carrying emotions that neither of them had words for yet. Finally, Rowan stepped back, but his voice when he spoke was a promise and a threat in equal measure. If they hurt you, there won't be a corner of this kingdom dark enough for them to hide. The royal soldiers surrounded Sarah, and she didn't resist as they bound her wrists. The silver-haired commander took her arm, not roughly but firmly, and led her away from the cave. As they disappeared into the storm, Sarah looked back once. Rowan stood at the cave entrance, silhouetted against the firelight, watching her go. And in that moment, she made a decision. A reckless, dangerous, impossible decision. She was going to do something no Omega had done in 70 years. She was going to sing. Not with her damaged voice, with something deeper. With the part of herself that Draven had tried to destroy and the Council had tried to suppress. With the power that ran through every Omega's bloodline, ancient and terrible and beautiful. The Resonance Song. If she could reach enough people at once, if she could form bonds with multiple consciousnesses simultaneously, she might be able to shatter Draven's network. Break the hold the shadow poison had on everyone he'd infected. It would probably kill her. The energy required was astronomical, but it might also be the only way to stop this before it consumed the entire kingdom. The soldiers marched her through the storm, unaware that they weren't taking a prisoner to her execution. They were escorting the weapon that would break their master's empire. And deep in whatever fortress Draven had claimed as his own, Sarah knew he was waiting, confident, secure in his power. He had no idea what was coming. They marched for 2 days through terrain that grew progressively more hostile. The storm never fully broke, just shifted between snow and freezing rain, the wind constant and cutting. Sarah's bound wrist chafed raw within hours, her wounded shoulder a constant blaze of agony that spread tendrils of infection through her arm. The silver-haired commander, he'd never offered his name, and Sarah hadn't asked, kept a firm grip on her elbow, steering her through rocky passes and frozen streams with mechanical efficiency. The soldiers spoke little, their faces hard and closed. They were professionals, following orders, asking no questions. But Sarah caught them watching her sometimes. Their expressions a mixture of curiosity and unease. She was a legend to them, she realized. The Omega who'd killed a queen. The healer who'd been cast out in disgrace. A cautionary tale made flesh. On the second night, they made camp in a shallow ravine that offered minimal protection from the elements. The soldiers erected a single tent for their commander and tied Sarah to a stake driven into the frozen ground, leaving her exposed to the wind. They tossed her a thin blanket and a piece of stale bread, then retreated to their own shelters. Sarah sat in the dark, shivering, her mind racing. The infection in her shoulder was getting worse. She could feel the heat radiating from it, the way her skin was tight and swollen around the wounds. Fever would come soon, and if it got bad enough, she'd be delirious by the time they reached wherever they were taking her. That couldn't happen. She needed to be lucid, sharp, ready. She closed her eyes and reached inward, searching for the well of power that every Omega possessed, the ancient gift that the modern kingdom had spent generations trying to suppress and control. It was still there, buried deep beneath layers of exhaustion and pain, but intact. Waiting. The resonance song wasn't like the resonance bond. The bond required physical contact, a direct connection between two individuals. But the song was different. It was broadcast, not targeted. A call that could reach multiple consciousnesses simultaneously, creating a web of connections rather than a single thread. It was also exponentially more dangerous. The bond with Rowan had nearly killed her, and that was just one person. The song could reach dozens, hundreds if she was strong enough. But the energy cost was astronomical, and the risk of losing herself in the network, of being pulled apart by too many minds, too many needs, too many voices, all screaming at once, was very real. Omega healers had used it in the old days before the hierarchies solidified. They'd used it to coordinate healing efforts during plagues, to calm entire armies on the edge of breaking, to unite fractured communities. It was the reason alphas had feared them, the reason the techniques had been banned, because an Omega who could reach into the minds of hundreds at once wasn't just a healer. She was power incarnate. Sarah tested the bonds around her wrists. They were tight, professional, but not impossible. The soldiers had tied her thinking she was weak, broken, no threat. They'd underestimated her. Everyone always did. On the third day, the landscape changed. The rocky wilderness gave way to something that made Sarah's blood run cold. A valley of dead trees, their branches bare and twisted like skeletal hands reaching for a sky they'd never touch again. The ground was gray, lifeless, and the air smelled wrong, sulfurous, diseased. "What is this place?" Sarah asked, the first word she'd spoken since the surrender. The silver-haired commander glanced at her. "The Blighted Reach, where Master Holt has established his sanctuary." Sanctuary. The word was obscene in this context. This wasn't a sanctuary, it was a graveyard, a testament to corruption and death. They descended into the valley, and Sarah saw them. Shadow creatures, dozens of them, moving through the dead forest like sharks through dark water. But these weren't wild, chaotic like the ones that had attacked Ashvale. These moved with purpose, with organization. They were patrolling, guarding, and among them, she saw people, or what had once been people. Transformed partially, their bodies caught between human and shadow, skin still flesh-toned but veined with black, eyes glowing faintly red, movements just slightly too fluid to be natural. "The Evolved," the commander said, following her gaze. "Master Holt's greatest achievement, neither fully alpha nor omega, but something transcendent, superior." "They're slaves," Sarah said flatly, "puppets dancing on his strings. They're free of the limitations that have held our society back for generations, free of the hierarchy that puts arbitrary labels on people based on their birth." The commander's voice carried an edge of fanaticism that made Sarah's skin crawl. "Master Holt is building a new world. You should be honored. He wants you to be part of it." At the center of the valley stood a structure that made Sarah's breath catch. It was the old royal healing monastery, but transformed beyond recognition. The once beautiful stone buildings had been twisted, corrupted, wrapped in some kind of organic growth that pulsed with sickly bioluminescence. Towers that had once reached gracefully toward the sky now jutted at wrong angles, their surfaces slick with something that moved and breathed. And throughout it all, she could feel it, the heartbeat of the network. Every transformed creature, every shadow beast, every corrupted soul, all connected through invisible threads to a single source at the structure's heart. Draven. The soldiers marched her through gates that had once been wrought iron, but were now fused with living shadow matter. The courtyard beyond was filled with the transformed, at least 100 of them, all turned to watch as she passed. Their red eyes tracked her movement with unsettling synchronicity. They took her inside, through corridors that Sarah remembered from her training days, but which now felt alien and wrong. The walls breathed, the floor pulsed. Organic matter had grown through the stone like cancer, transforming everything it touched. Finally, they brought her to what had once been the Grand Healing Hall, a vast circular chamber where Omega healers had once gathered to share knowledge and techniques. Now it was something else entirely. The center of the web. And there, standing at the room's heart, was Draven Holt. He looked younger than Sarah remembered, which was wrong in every possible way. He should have been in his 60s by now, his hair gray, his face lined. Instead, he appeared barely 40, his skin smooth, his dark hair only lightly touched with silver. The shadow transformation had done that to him, she realized. Preserved him, changed him. "Sarah," he said, his voice warm and welcoming like they were old friends meeting for tea. "I'm so glad you could join us. We have so much to discuss." The soldiers released her and stepped back. Sarah stood alone in the center of the corrupted healing hall, facing the man who had destroyed her life. "You look terrible," Draven continued, moving closer. "That shoulder wound is infected, and you've been pushing yourself far too hard, using the resonance bond twice in 3 days. Honestly, I'm impressed you're still standing. Save the concern. You don't get to pretend you care about my well-being." Draven's expression shifted to something that might have been genuine hurt. "I do care, Sarah. I always have. You were my best student, the most talented Omega healer I'd ever trained. It broke my heart to frame you for the Queen's death." The casual admission hit like a physical blow. Sarah had known, of course, had suspected since the moment she'd felt him through the bond in Ashvale. But hearing him say it so plainly, so matter-of-factly, made rage surge through her veins like liquid fire. "Why?" The word came out as barely more than a whisper. "Why did you do it?" Draven sighed and gestured around the corrupted chamber. "Because someone had to break the cycle. The kingdom's hierarchy is an abomination. Alpha's dominating, Omega's subservient, Beta's caught in between. All of it arbitrary, all of it designed to concentrate power in the hands of a few, while the rest of us serve." He looked at her intently. "You felt it too. Don't pretend you didn't. Every time the council dismissed your innovations because you were an Omega, every time they demanded you defer to lesser healers simply because they were Alpha, you hated it as much as I did. Hating something doesn't justify mass murder. I haven't murdered anyone. I've liberated them, freed them from the constraints of their biology." Draven moved closer, his eyes bright with fervor. "The shadow transformation doesn't destroy the person, Sarah. It elevates them, removes the artificial limitations imposed by the hierarchy. Alpha, Omega, Beta, meaningless distinctions in the face of true evolution. They're not free. They're controlled. I felt it, Draven. The network. Every single one of them connected back to you, following your will. For now, yes. During the transition period, guidance is necessary, but eventually they'll develop full autonomy. A collective consciousness free of the old order's poison. That's not autonomy. That's a hive mind with you as the queen bee." Draven's expression hardened. "You always were stubborn. It's one of the things I admired about you." He snapped his fingers, and two of the transformed stepped forward from the shadows. "Secure her. I'll need to prepare for the integration ritual." Sarah's heart raced. "Integration? Did you think I brought you here just to gloat?" Draven smiled, and it was the smile of her old mentor, the one who'd taught her compound fracture care and praised her innovative suturing techniques. The disconnect between that smile and the monster he'd become was nauseating. "You're the key, Sarah. The only Omega healer left with enough knowledge of the old techniques to anchor a mass resonance. With you integrated into the network, I can accelerate the transformation across the entire kingdom. Every city, every town, every village, all evolved simultaneously." The transformed guards grabbed her arms, their grip inhumanly strong. Sarah struggled, but she was weak from infection and exhaustion, and they were enhanced by shadow corruption. They dragged her toward what looked like an altar at the chamber's far end, a stone table surrounded by pulsing organic matter that writhed with anticipation. This was it. The moment she'd been waiting for. Sarah stopped struggling. She closed her eyes and reached deep within herself, past the pain, past the exhaustion, past the fear.
She reached for the well of power that had been sleeping in her bloodline for generations. The gift that the kingdom had tried to suppress. The song that could shatter chains. When she opened her eyes again, they were glowing with silver light. Draven froze. No, you can't possibly. The energy required would... Sarah opened her mouth, and the resonant song poured out. It wasn't sound, not in any conventional sense. It was vibration, frequency, the fundamental harmonic of existence itself. It resonated through the stone, through the air, through the organic corruption coating every surface, and most importantly, through every transformed soul in the valley. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. Every creature connected to Draven's network suddenly felt her presence, not as a foreign invader, but as something familiar, something that called to the buried remnants of their humanity. The song reached into their minds, into the places where Draven's control had wrapped around their consciousness like chains, and it showed them a different way. The transformed guards holding Sarah released her and stumbled back, their red eyes flickering, fighting the song's pull. Throughout the monastery, she could feel others doing the same, stopping mid-motion, their synchronized movements falling out of rhythm as individual will began to reassert itself. Draven's face contorted with rage. "Stop! You'll kill yourself! The energy cost alone." But Sarah didn't stop. She poured everything she had into the song, reaching further, deeper, touching every node in the network. She felt Garrett's consciousness, buried deep beneath layers of corruption, and she called to him. She felt dozens of others, the 3 miners from Ashvale who'd been taken, transformed soldiers from the capital, villagers from towns she'd never heard of, and she called to them all, and they answered. The network began to fracture. Connections that Draven had forged through force and poison began breaking apart as individual wills reasserted themselves. The song showed them that they didn't have to be one mind. They could be themselves again. Flawed, limited, but free. Draven screamed and thrust his hands forward. Shadow energy exploded from his palms, lashing out at Sarah like black lightning. But the song was a shield, deflecting the attack, scattering it harmlessly. "You don't understand what you're doing," Draven shouted, his composure completely shattered now. "The transformation is irreversible. If you break the network now, they'll all die. Every single one of them." Sarah met his eyes, her voice still carrying the song's harmonic resonance. "You're lying." And she knew she was right because she could feel it through the connections. The transformed weren't dying as the network fractured. They were waking up, fighting through the corruption, finding themselves again. But the cost was devastating. The energy required to maintain the song across so many consciousnesses was tearing Sarah apart from the inside. She could feel herself fragmenting, pieces of her awareness scattering across the network, spreading thinner and thinner. She was dying. And she didn't care, because for the first time in 3 years, she was doing what she'd been born to do. She was healing. Not bodies, but souls. Not flesh, but the fundamental essence of who these people were. The silver light emanating from her grew brighter, filling the chamber, spilling out into the corridors beyond. The organic corruption coating the walls began to shrivel and die, unable to withstand the song's purifying frequency. Draven lunged for her, his hands transforming into shadow claws. "If I can't have you, then no one will." But before he could reach her, someone slammed into him from the side. Rowan. He'd come through one of the chamber's side entrances, his sword drawn, his face a mask of fury. Kane and Margot were right behind him, along with a dozen soldiers wearing royal colors. But not the soldiers who'd escorted Sarah here. These were different. Their eyes were clear, uncorrupted. "We followed you," Rowan said, circling Draven with his sword leveled. "Stayed just out of sight, waited for the right moment." "You're too late," Draven snarled. "Even if you kill me, the transformation will continue. The seeds I've planted throughout the kingdom are being purged right now." Sarah interrupted, her voice harmonizing with the song still emanating from her core. "Every single person you infected. I'm reaching all of them, showing them the way back." Draven's face went pale. "That's impossible. The range required, the energy cost. You'd have to..." He stopped, realization dawning. "You're killing yourself," he whispered. "You're burning through your entire life force to break the network." "Yes." "Why? For these people? For a kingdom that exiled you? For a system that treated you like property?" Sarah smiled,
and it was sad and fierce and absolutely certain. Because they deserved the choice, something you never gave them. The song reached a crescendo. Throughout the valley, the transformed began to change. The black veins receding, the red glow fading from their eyes, their bodies returning to their natural states. Some collapsed, unconscious but alive. Others fell to their knees, weeping. A few simply stood there, dazed and disoriented but free. And in the monastery's heart, Draven Holt's network shattered completely. He screamed, clutching his head as the connections he'd spent years building were severed one by one. Without the network, the shadow corruption that had preserved and enhanced him began to consume him instead. Black veins erupted across his skin, his body convulsed. "Help me!" he gasped, reaching toward Sarah. "Please, you're a healer. You can't just let me—" Sarah looked at him, this man who had been her mentor, her teacher, her destroyer, and she made a choice. She extended the song one more time, reaching for his consciousness, not to control or dominate, but to offer the same choice she'd given everyone else: freedom or corruption, life or living death. Draven hesitated for just a moment. Then, to Sarah's surprise, he grasped the lifeline. The shadow corruption fought back, clinging to him, but Sarah's song was stronger. It burned through the poison, purging it cell by cell, molecule by molecule. Draven screamed as his body was torn apart and rebuilt, the shadow matter forced out through every pore, until finally, he collapsed onto the stone floor. Human. Aged 63, his hair white, his face lined, looking exactly as old as he should have been. The transformation was gone, and with it, his power. Sarah swayed on her feet. The song was fading now, her energy completely spent. She'd done it, broken the network, freed the transformed, stopped the plague. But the cost had been everything. Her legs gave out. Rowan caught her before she hit the ground, lowering her gently. His face swam in and out of focus above her. "Stay with me," he said, his voice rough. "Sarah, stay with me." "The monastery," she whispered. "The archives. Second floor. Old texts on Omega healing techniques. You'll need them to help the ones who are too far gone." "I don't care about the archives. I care about you." She smiled weakly. "Liar. You care about duty, honor, doing what's right. It's who you are. Then stay alive, because losing you wouldn't be right." Sarah's vision was dimming. She could feel herself slipping away, her life force burned down to almost nothing. But there was something else too, a warmth spreading through her chest, originating from the place where Rowan's hand rested above her heart. The bond. The connection they'd formed when she'd healed him. It hadn't completely dissolved, and now through that thread she felt something flowing into her. Energy, life force, Rowan's strength offered freely. "What are you doing?" she gasped. "Returning the favor," Rowan said quietly. "You saved me twice. Now it's my turn." "You can't. The bond, it only works one way. Omega to Alpha, never the reverse." "Then I guess we're breaking another rule." And impossibly, miraculously, it worked. The bond that had been forged in desperation strengthened, deepened, and through it, Rowan poured his alpha vitality into Sarah's failing body. Not dominating or overwhelming, but supporting. Sharing. Equalizing. It was the resonance bond in reverse, something that shouldn't have been possible according to every text ever written about Omega and Alpha physiology. But it was happening, because they both willed it, because they both chose it. Sarah's breathing steadied. The fatal dimming of her vision stopped. She wasn't healed. She was still desperately weak, still injured, still pushed to her absolute limits. But she wasn't dying anymore. Around them, the corrupted monastery was collapsing, the organic matter that had sustained it crumbling to ash without the network to feed it. Margot was organizing the evacuation, getting the freed transformed out of the structure before it buried them all. Kane stood over Draven's unconscious form, his sword still drawn, his expression conflicted. "What do we do with him?" "Take him to the capital," Rowan said, still cradling Sarah. "Let the king and the council decide his fate. But make sure he's secured. No shadow corruption techniques, no second chances." "And her?" Kane nodded toward Sarah. The council's orders were issued by a traitor," Rowan interrupted sharply.
Sarah Vance just saved the entire kingdom using techniques they banned. I'd say that earns her a pardon. And if they disagree, they can argue with me personally. Kane was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded slowly. Yes, Commander. Sarah tried to sit up, but Rowan held her still. Don't. You need rest. Actual rest, not just a few minutes before throwing yourself into the next impossible situation. The freed transformed. They'll need help. The purging process. Some of them might have residual corruption, and the psychological trauma of what they experienced will be handled by other healers. You've done enough. But I'm the only one who, Sarah. Rowan's voice was firm but gentle. You've spent 3 years in exile proving you're the greatest healer this kingdom has ever seen. You've broken a conspiracy, shattered a plague, and literally rewritten what we thought was possible between alphas and omegas. You don't have to prove anything else. Not to me, not to anyone. Tears stung Sarah's eyes. When was the last time someone had told her she was enough? That she could stop fighting, stop pushing, stop trying to earn redemption for crimes she'd never committed? They'll still blame me, she said quietly. The council, the people, they'll find a way to make this my fault. Let them try, Rowan said. They'll have to get through me first, and Margot, and Kane, and every soldier who witnessed what you did here today, and every freed soul whose life you saved. He helped her to her feet, supporting most of her weight. You're not alone anymore, Sarah. You don't have to fight by yourself. As they made their way out of the collapsing monastery, Sarah looked back once at the ruins of what Draven had built. His vision of a new world, free from hierarchy, had been twisted into something monstrous by his willingness to force evolution rather than allow choice. But maybe there was a kernel of truth in what he'd said. Maybe the hierarchy was broken. Maybe alphas and omegas didn't have to be locked in an eternal power struggle of dominance and submission. Maybe there was a third way. Partnership, equality, choice. She'd just proven it was possible. The bond she shared with Rowan, flowing both ways, breaking every rule, that was the future Draven had claimed to want, but could never achieve because he couldn't let go of control. Real freedom required trust, and trust required seeing each other as equals, not as alpha and omega, but as people. Outside, the valley was transforming. The dead trees were still dead, the ground still gray, but the oppressive weight of corruption had lifted. The freed transformed gathered in small groups, helping each other, comparing injuries, trying to piece together what had happened to them. And when they saw Sarah emerge from the monastery, leaning on Rowan's shoulder, something rippled through the crowd. One by one, they began to kneel. No, Sarah said hoarsely. Don't. Please don't. But they weren't kneeling in submission or worship. They were kneeling in respect, in gratitude, in recognition of what she'd sacrificed to give them back their freedom. An older man stepped forward, his face weathered, his eyes clear for the first time in months. You're the healer, the one who broke the chains. You're the reason we're still ourselves, he interrupted gently. The reason we're still human. Whatever happens next, wherever we go from here, we owe you everything. Sarah didn't know what to say. For 3 years, she'd been reviled, blamed, cast out. And now, in this valley of death and corruption, she was being celebrated as a hero. It felt surreal. Wrong, somehow. She'd only done what any healer should do, saved the lives she could, fought for those who couldn't fight for themselves. But as she looked around at the faces of the freed, at Garrett, standing with his family who'd somehow found their way here, at the transformed soldiers now weeping with relief, at the dozens of others who'd been given a second chance, she realized something. She hadn't just broken Draven's network. She'd proven that the old hierarchy was obsolete, that omegas weren't weak, that alphas didn't have to dominate, that working together, trusting each other, seeing each other as equals, that was the real power, and the kingdom would never be the same. Margot approached, her expression carefully neutral. Commander, we need to move. Some of the transformed are too weak to travel, but staying here isn't safe. The structure could collapse completely within hours. Rowan nodded. Get everyone to the northern ridge. Set up a temporary camp there. Send riders to the nearest garrison for medical supplies and reinforcements. And the healer? Rowan looked down at Sarah, his dark eyes unreadable. She comes with me. We're going to the capital. It's time the council heard the truth. They won't want to listen, Sarah said quietly.
Then we'll make them listen. As they prepared to leave the valley, Sarah felt something shift in the air. Not physical, but something deeper. The kingdom's power structure, so carefully maintained for generations, had developed a crack. A fissure that would only grow wider as word spread of what had happened here. An Omega had broken an Alpha's conspiracy, had saved the kingdom using forbidden techniques, had proven that cooperation was stronger than domination. The old order was dying, and from its ashes, something new was being born. The journey to the capital took 9 days, and every single one of them was a battle in its own right. The freed transformed traveled with them, over 200 souls who'd been pulled back from the edge of something monstrous and now had nowhere else to go. Some were soldiers who'd been corrupted during border skirmishes. Others were civilians from towns Sarah had never heard of, people who'd simply been in the wrong place when Draven's agents had struck. And a few, a precious, painful few, were Omega healers like herself, women and men who'd been targeted specifically because of their knowledge of the old techniques. They moved slowly, hampered by injuries and exhaustion and the sheer logistics of keeping that many traumatized people fed and sheltered. Sarah spent every waking hour treating wounds, both physical and psychological. Her own shoulder was healing, finally, the infection broken by Margot's careful tending and Sarah's own stubborn refusal to let it claim her arm. But she was still weak, still pushing herself beyond reasonable limits. Rowan stayed close, watching her with an intensity that would have made her uncomfortable if it hadn't been so clearly rooted in concern rather than control. The bond between them had settled into something permanent, a constant low-level awareness of each other's presence that neither of them quite knew how to define. On the 5th day, they encountered the first resistance. A garrison of royal soldiers blocked the road, their commander, a barrel-chested alpha named Torrance, refusing to let them pass. "My orders are clear," Torrance said, his hand on his sword hilt. "No one from the Blighted Reach is allowed within 100 miles of the capital. The corruption could spread." "The corruption is gone," Rowan said, his voice hard with authority. "These people have been freed. They're refugees, not threats." "So you say, but Master Healer Draven Holt sent word 3 days ago warning that a rogue Omega might try to infiltrate the capital with corrupted soldiers. He said she'd use mind control techniques to make them seem normal." Torrance's eyes flicked to Sarah. "And here you are, Commander Cade, traveling with the very Omega he warned us about." Sarah stepped forward before Rowan could respond. "Draven Holt is the traitor. He created the shadow poison. He transformed these people against their will, and he framed me for the Queen's death 3 years ago. That's a serious accusation against a member of the Royal Council." "It's the truth." Torrance studied her for a long moment. "Even if I believed you, which I don't, my orders stand. You don't pass. Turn around and go back to whatever hole you crawled out of, or we'll make you turn around." The tension was immediate and explosive. Rowan's soldiers moved to defensive positions. Torrance's men did the same. Behind them, the freed transformed watched with wide, frightened eyes. They just escaped one nightmare. The thought of being plunged into another was almost too much to bear. Sarah felt it building, the violence about to erupt, and she made a decision. She stepped between the two forces, holding up her hands. "Wait, there's another way." "Sarah," Rowan began, "trust me." She looked at Torrance. "You say we might be corrupted, that we could be under mind control. Fine, test us." Torrance's eyes narrowed. "How?" "The shadow corruption leaves traces. Residual energy in the bloodstream, markers in the skin. Any competent healer could detect them." She gestured to the garrison. "You must have a medic. Have them examine me. Examine anyone you want. If you find even a trace of corruption, you can execute me right here and send everyone else back. And if we don't find anything, then you let us pass, and you send word to the capital that Draven Holt is the real threat, not us." Torrance considered this. Then he called over his shoulder, "Healer Yara, get out here." A woman emerged from the garrison building, middle-aged, beta, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She looked Sarah up and down with professional assessment. "I need you to examine this woman for shadow corruption," Torrance said. Yara nodded and approached Sarah. "Hold out your hands." Sarah obeyed. Yara took her wrists, her fingers probing the pulse points, her eyes closed in concentration. She was using a basic diagnostic technique, one that any trained healer would know. Sarah felt the gentle probe of Yara's awareness, checking her blood flow, her energy signatures, the fundamental markers of health and disease. After a long moment, Yara opened her eyes. No corruption. She's clean. Check again, Torrance ordered. Yara's expression hardened. I don't need to check again. I know what shadow corruption looks like. This woman doesn't have it. She paused, studying Sarah more closely. But she has something else. Something I've never seen before. Her energy signature is different, changed. Changed how? Like she's been burned down to nothing and rebuilt from the foundation up. Whatever she went through, it was catastrophic. She should be dead. Yara released Sarah's wrists. But she's not corrupted. I'd stake my reputation on it. Torrance's jaw worked. Fine. Check the others. All of them. It took hours. Yara examined every single person in their group, her professionalism never wavering despite the tedium. And one by one, she declared them clean. The shadow corruption was gone, purged by Sarah's resonance song, leaving only scars and memories. When the last examination was complete, Yara turned to Torrance. They're telling the truth. Whatever happened to these people, they're not corrupted anymore. They're just tired and scared, and they need help, not suspicion. Torrance stood silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, he stepped aside. You can pass, but I'm sending a detachment with you. And if anything happens, if even one person shows signs of corruption, you'll have every right to put us down, Sarah finished quietly. I understand. They moved on, now accompanied by 20 of Torrance's soldiers. The commander himself rode near the front, his expression troubled. On the 7th day, as they made camp in the shadow of the capital's outer walls, he sought Sarah out. I need to understand something, he said without preamble. Draven Holt. I've met him, spoken with him. He seemed reasonable, concerned about the kingdom's welfare. How does a man like that turn into what you're describing? Sarah was quiet for a moment, tending to a young woman's sprained ankle while they spoke. I don't think he turned into anything. I think he always believed the hierarchy was wrong. So did I. So do a lot of people. She finished wrapping the bandage and looked up at Torrance. The difference is how you respond to injustice. You can work within the system to change it, or you can decide the system is too broken to fix and burn it all down. And you? How are you responding? I'm trying to prove there's a third option. Partnership, cooperation, showing that alphas and omegas are stronger together than they are in opposition. She gestured around the camp. These people, they're the proof. Every one of them was saved because an omega healer and an alpha commander chose to work together instead of following the old rules. Torrance absorbed this. The council won't like it. They've built their entire power structure on the hierarchy. I know. They might kill you just for threatening it. I know that too. Then why are you doing this? Sarah smiled, tired but genuine. Because someone has to, and because I'm tired of living in a world where I have to apologize for being good at what I do. The capital loomed before them on the 9th day, its white walls gleaming in the morning sun. It had been 3 years since Sarah had last seen those walls. 3 years since they'd dragged her through the streets in chains, since the crowds had screamed for her death, since the council had stripped away everything she'd worked for and thrown her into exile. The memories threatened to overwhelm her, but Rowan's presence beside her, solid, steady, unshakable, kept her grounded. You don't have to do this, he said quietly as they approached the gates. We could turn around, take everyone north, establish a new settlement away from the council's reach. And live as fugitives, always looking over our shoulders, waiting for them to send soldiers? Sarah shook her head. No, this ends today, one way or another. The gates opened at Rowan's command. His rank still carried weight, at least, and they entered the city. Word of their approach had clearly spread because crowds lined the streets, watching in silence as the strange procession passed. Sarah saw fear in their faces, but also curiosity, and here and there something that might have been hope. The Royal Council convened an emergency session within an hour of their arrival. Sarah stood in the great hall where she'd once been tried and condemned, acutely aware of the symbolism. The same stone floors, the same vaulted ceiling, the same 7 seats arranged in a semicircle of judgment. But this time, one of those seats was empty. Draven's seat, The remaining 6 counselors looked down at her with expressions ranging from barely concealed hostility to cautious neutrality. Lord Chancellor Voss, the highest-ranking member, spoke first. Sarah Vance, you were exiled from this kingdom on pain of death should you return, yet here you stand. His voice was cold, formal. Explain yourself. I returned because the kingdom is under attack, Sarah said, her damaged voice carrying clearly through the hall. Master healer Draven Holt has been conducting experiments with shadow corruption, transforming citizens against their will. He's the one who killed Queen Alara 3 years ago, and he framed me for it. The hall erupted in shocked murmurs. Counselor Thane, an elderly alpha with a reputation for fairness, raised his hand for silence. That's an extraordinary claim. What proof do you offer? Draven himself, Rowan said, stepping forward. We have him in custody, along with 200 witnesses who were transformed by his corruption and freed by Healer Vance's intervention. Impossible, snapped Counselor Mirena, a sharp-faced Omega who'd been one of Sarah's harshest critics during the original trial. Shadow corruption is irreversible. Everyone knows that. It was irreversible, Sarah corrected, until I used the resonance song to purge it. The silence that followed was absolute. The resonance song, Voss said slowly, is a forbidden technique, banned under penalty of death for over 70 years. Yes. And you admit to using it. I do. It was the only way to save those people. The law is clear, Healer Vance. Use of forbidden Omega techniques is punishable by execution. Voss leaned forward. You've just confessed to a capital crime in front of the entire council. I've confessed to saving the kingdom, Sarah shot back. To stopping a plague that would have consumed every city from here to the northern border. To freeing people from a corruption that your laws said was impossible to cure. Her voice rose, carrying the full force of 3 years of anger and hurt and determination. So yes, I broke your laws, and I do it again in a heartbeat. The hall erupted again, counselors shouting over each other, some calling for her immediate arrest, others demanding to hear more evidence. In the gallery above, citizens who'd been allowed to observe the proceedings were on their feet, adding their voices to the chaos. Rowan drew his sword, the ring of steel cutting through the noise. Enough! Every eye turned to him. For 3 years, Rowan said, his voice hard as stone. This council has operated under false information. You condemned an innocent woman based on manufactured evidence. You exiled the kingdom's greatest healer because a traitor manipulated you. And now, when she returns with proof of that betrayal, with hundreds of saved lives as testimony to her skill and courage, you want to execute her for breaking laws that were written to suppress Omega power in the first place. Commander Cade, Voss said warningly, you overstep. I overstep nothing. I'm exercising my right as a ranking military officer to demand justice. Real justice, not the political theater you've been performing. Rowan's eyes swept the council. Bring Draven Holt before this assembly. Let him answer for his crimes, and if you find Sarah Vance guilty of anything after hearing the full truth, then you'll have to execute me too, because I helped her, supported her, and I'd make the same choice again. One by one, other voices joined his. Kane stepped forward. As would I. Margot moved to Sarah's other side. And I. Torrance, who'd been standing at the back of the hall, came forward. I don't know this woman, met her 9 days ago, but I've seen what she can do, what she's willing to sacrifice. And if you execute her, you're no better than the monsters you claim to stand against. The tide was turning. Sarah could feel it, see it in the way some of the counselors were shifting uncomfortably, and how the crowd in the gallery had gone from hostile to uncertain. Counselor Thane cleared his throat. Perhaps we should hear from the accused. Bring Draven Holt. They brought him in chains, looking every one of his 63 years. The shadow corruption that had preserved him was gone, leaving behind a shell of the powerful healer he'd once been. But his eyes were still sharp, still intelligent, and when he saw Sarah standing in the center of the hall, he smiled. Sarah, my greatest student, I should have known you'd find a way. Tell them, Sarah said quietly. Tell them what you did. Why? They'll never believe it. They'll never accept that their precious hierarchy drove me to this. But then he shrugged, though I suppose it doesn't matter anymore. My work is done. Your work failed, Sarah said. Did it? Draven's smile widened. Look around, Sarah. You've broken the Council's most sacred laws, and they're debating whether to condemn you. You've proven that Omega healers are more powerful than anyone wanted to admit. You've shown that the old techniques work, that the hierarchy is artificial. He laughed, a hollow sound. I may have lost, but you've won my argument for me. The council chambers were dead silent. Yes, I killed the queen, Draven continued, his voice carrying easily. She was going to outlaw all Omega healing research, called it dangerous, unnatural. She would have set us back a century. So I poisoned her with a compound that mimicked shadow corruption and blamed it on Sarah because she was the only one skilled enough to have attempted an experimental cure. He looked directly at Voss. And you all believed it, because the idea of an Omega being competent enough to treat the queen but reckless enough to kill her fit your prejudices perfectly. You're insane, Moreno whispered. I'm honest, Draven corrected. The hierarchy you've built, it's a cage. For everyone. Alpha's forced to dominate, Omega's forced to submit, everyone locked into roles they might not want. I tried to break that cage. Sarah's doing the same thing, just with different methods. Voss's hands were shaking. You admit to regicide, to treason, to corruption of hundreds of innocent citizens. I admit to trying to evolve beyond your broken system. The corruption was a tool, nothing more. The transformation was meant to free people from their biological limitations. It turned them into monsters, Sarah said. It turned them into something new, something beyond Alpha and Omega. Draven met her eyes. Tell me honestly, Sarah, when you formed that bond with Commander Cade, when you broke every rule to save his life, did you feel limited by your Omega nature, or did you feel powerful? Sarah didn't answer, because he was right in a twisted way. The bond with Rowan, the resonance song, the old techniques, they had made her feel powerful, had proven that Omegas weren't the weak, submissive beings the hierarchy claimed. But Draven had missed the crucial point. Power without choice is tyranny, Sarah said quietly. You didn't free anyone, Draven. You just replaced one form of control with another. The people I saved, I gave them a choice. Return to themselves or stay transformed. Every single one chose to be free of your network. Because you manipulated them with your song. Because I showed them there was another option. That's the difference between us. You believed you knew what was best for everyone. I believe people should get to decide for themselves. Draven stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly, his shoulders sagged. Perhaps you're right. Perhaps I became what I hated. He looked at the council. Do what you will with me. I'm old, I'm tired, and my life's work lies in ruins. But remember this, the girl you exiled is now your greatest asset. The techniques you banned are now your best defense. And the hierarchy you cling to is crumbling whether you acknowledge it or not. The council deliberated for 3 hours. Sarah waited outside the chambers, surrounded by Rowan and his soldiers, by the freed transformed, by a growing crowd of citizens who wanted to hear the verdict. When the doors finally opened, it was Councillor Thane who emerged. The council has reached a decision, he announced. Master Healer Draven Holt is found guilty of regicide, treason, and crimes against the kingdom. He will be stripped of all titles and executed at dawn. He paused. Regarding Sarah Vance, the charges against her for the Queen's death are dismissed. Evidence of her innocence has been conclusively established. Relief swept through Sarah, so intense it made her dizzy. However, Thane continued, and her heart sank. The matter of her use of forbidden techniques remains. The law is clear on this point. Then change the law, a voice called from the crowd. Sarah turned to see who'd spoken and was shocked to recognize him. Master Healer Orin, one of the most conservative members of the Healing Guild, someone who'd testified against her during the original trial. Orin stepped forward, his expression grave. I was wrong about Sarah Vance. We all were. She's proven that the old Omega techniques aren't dangerous. Our fear of them is what's dangerous. Our insistence on suppressing Omega power has left us vulnerable to threats we can't handle with conventional methods. He looked at the council. If we execute her now, we're no better than Draven. We're putting our pride above the kingdom's survival. Others joined him. Healers from the Royal Guild, soldiers who'd fought shadow creatures, civilians whose family members had been among the freed transformed. The crowd swelled, their voices rising in a chant that started small but grew with each repetition. "Pardon the healer, pardon the healer, pardon the healer." Thane raised his hands for quiet. "The council will deliberate further." Another hour passed. When they emerged again, it was Voss himself who spoke. "The Royal Council has decided to grant Sarah Vance a full pardon for all crimes, past and present. Furthermore, we are establishing a commission to review the laws regarding Omega healing techniques. Some traditions serve us well. Others," he paused, his expression pained, "others may need to be reconsidered in light of recent events." The crowd erupted in cheers. Sarah stood frozen, unable to fully process what she was hearing. "Additionally," Voss continued, "Sarah Vance is hereby reinstated as a master healer with all rights and privileges that position entails, and she is appointed to lead a new healing order, one that will research and safely implement traditional Omega techniques for the benefit of the entire kingdom." Rowan's hand found hers, squeezing gently. She looked up at him, saw the pride in his eyes, the certainty that this was right. "There is one condition," Voss said. "The new order must include both Omega and Alpha healers, working together, sharing knowledge freely. No more segregation, no more hierarchy within the healing arts." Sarah found her voice. "That's not a condition. That's exactly what I wanted." 3 months later, the new healing order had its official opening. The ceremony was held in what had once been the Royal Healing Academy, now transformed and renamed the Academy of Resonance, a place where Omega and Alpha healers trained side by side, where the old techniques were taught alongside the new, where partnership was valued over dominance. Sarah stood at the entrance, greeting students as they arrived. Young Omegas who'd been told their entire lives that they were too weak to be real healers. Alphas who'd been taught that healing was beneath them. Betas who'd been overlooked entirely. All of them eager to learn, to grow, to be part of something new. Garrett was there, fully recovered, his family beside him. He'd asked to study at the academy, to learn healing so he could help others the way Sarah had helped him. She'd accepted him immediately. The freed transformed had scattered throughout the kingdom, returning to their homes, reuniting with families, trying to rebuild lives that had been shattered. But many of them sent letters to Sarah, thanking her, updating her on their progress. Some sent their children to study at the academy. A few even came themselves, wanting to understand what had happened to them, wanting to ensure it never happened to anyone else. Draven had been executed as promised, but his last words had haunted Sarah. He'd looked at her from the scaffold and said, "You'll finish what I started, not the corruption, but the revolution. The hierarchy's dying, Sarah, and you're the one holding the knife." She'd wanted to deny it, to insist she wasn't trying to overthrow anything, but deep down she knew he was partially right. The order she was building would change everything, not through force or corruption, but through simple demonstration that there was a better way. Rowan found her as the opening ceremony was concluding, the students dispersing to their first classes. He'd been appointed as head of the kingdom's reformed military academy, tasked with implementing similar changes, teaching cooperation alongside combat, strategy alongside strength. "How does it feel?" he asked, watching the students file past. "Getting everything you wanted?" "Terrifying," Sarah admitted. "What if I can't do this? What if the old order is too entrenched to change?" "You've already changed it. Look around." Rowan gestured at the students, Alphas and Omegas laughing together, sharing notes, treating each other as equals. This would have been impossible 6 months ago. Now it's just normal. For them, the older generation will adapt or be left behind. Rowan's voice was gentle but firm. "Change doesn't happen all at once, Sarah. It's incremental. Every student you teach, every healer you train, every person you show that cooperation works better than domination. That's the revolution. One mind at a time." Sarah leaned against him, letting herself take comfort in his solid presence. The bond between them had settled into something permanent and profound. Neither dominance nor submission, but true partnership. They'd become the living proof that the old rules were obsolete. "I keep thinking about all the Omegas who came before me," she said quietly. "The ones who were silenced, suppressed, executed for daring to use their gifts. They deserve this. They deserve to be celebrated, not feared. So honor them by making sure future generations don't suffer the same fate." A young student approached them hesitantly, A girl, maybe 16, her posture screaming Omega conditioning, subservient, careful, afraid to take up too much space. "Healer Vance," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just wanted to say thank you for everything. My mother was one of the transformed. You saved her, and now—" She gestured around the academy. "Now I get to be a healer too. I never thought that would be possible." Sarah knelt down, bringing herself to the girl's eye level. "What's your name?" "Lyra." "Well, Lyra, I need you to understand something. This academy, this new order, it's not a gift I'm giving you. It's a right you've always had that was taken away. You don't owe me gratitude. You owe yourself the promise to be extraordinary." Lyra's eyes widened. "I'll try?" "Don't try. Do. Be brilliant, be bold, be everything they told you Omegas couldn't be." Sarah smiled. "And when someone tells you to be quiet, to be small, to remember your place, you tell them that Sarah Vance said your place is wherever you decide it should be." The girl nodded, something shifting in her posture, a straightening of the spine, a lifting of the chin, the first stirrings of confidence. As Lyra walked away, Sarah felt Rowan's hand on her shoulder. "You're good at this." "At what?" "Inspiring revolution." She laughed, the sound rough but genuine. "I'm just trying to heal what's broken." "You're healing more than you know." That night, Sarah stood alone in the Academy's library, surrounded by texts that had once been forbidden. Ancient Omega healing manuals brought out of hiding after 70 years. Techniques that had nearly been lost forever, now preserved and ready to be taught to a new generation. She ran her fingers over the spines of the books, feeling the weight of history. So many Omegas had fought for this knowledge, had paid with their lives to keep it alive. And now it was hers to share, to spread, to ensure it never disappeared again. A movement in the doorway caught her attention. Rowan stood there, just watching her. "Can't sleep?" she asked. "Neither can you, apparently." "Too much on my mind." He came closer, taking in the rows of books. "Regrets?" "About what?" "Any of it. The exile, the struggle, the choice to come back when you could have stayed hidden." Sarah considered this. "No. No regrets. If I'd stayed in Ashvale, Draven would have won. The kingdom would have fallen to shadow corruption. And all these," she gestured at the books, "would have been lost forever. You could have died a dozen times over. But I didn't. And because I didn't, everything's different now." She looked at him. "What about you? Regrets?" "Only one." Rowan's expression was serious. "I voted to exile you. I stood in that council chamber and condemned an innocent woman. I can't take that back." "You've made up for it." "Have I?" Sarah moved closer, taking his hands. "You gave me a second chance when everyone else wanted me dead. You fought beside me, trusted me with forbidden techniques, helped me break the conspiracy. And you're here now helping build something new." She squeezed his hands. "If you're looking for forgiveness, Rowan, you've had it for a while." He pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. Through the bond, she felt what he was feeling, relief, gratitude, and something deeper, something that didn't have a name yet but felt like coming home. "I don't know what we're building here," he said quietly. "This new order, this partnership between Alpha and Omega, it goes against everything we were taught." "Good. Everything we were taught was wrong." He laughed softly. "Fair point. We're building something better, something where people are valued for their skills and their character, not their designation at birth. Where cooperation is stronger than domination. Where an Omega healer and an Alpha commander can work side by side as equals. As partners." "As partners," Sarah agreed. They stood there in the quiet library, surrounded by forbidden knowledge that was forbidden no more. And Sarah felt something settle in her chest. Peace, purpose, the bone-deep certainty that she was exactly where she needed to be. The kingdom would never be the same. The old hierarchy was crumbling, slowly but inevitably. Each student she taught another crack in the foundation. There would be resistance, pushback, people who clung to the old ways out of fear or tradition or genuine belief. But change was coming, unstoppable, irreversible change. And Sarah Vance, the disgraced healer who'd been cast out and left to die, was leading the charge. 6 months after the academy's opening, the first class graduated. 23 students, Omega, Alpha, and Beta, all trained in both traditional and forbidden techniques, all committed to a new vision of healing that transcended the old boundaries. Sarah stood before them at the graduation ceremony, looking at their eager faces, and she thought about how far they'd all come. Not just in the past 6 months, but in the generations before them. All the Omegas who'd fought and died for the right to use their gifts freely. All the healers who'd kept the old knowledge alive in secret, waiting for the day it could emerge into the light. This was that day. "You are the first," Sarah told her graduates, her damaged voice carrying clearly through the hall. The first generation trained in both the old ways and the new. The first to learn that cooperation is stronger than hierarchy. The first to prove that we don't have to choose between Omega intuition and Alpha strength. We can have both. She paused, meeting each student's eyes in turn. The world you're going into isn't ready for you. There are still places where Omegas are property, where Alphas are expected to dominate, where suggesting partnership is seen as weakness. You'll face discrimination, hostility, maybe even violence, but you'll also have something they don't have. You'll have the truth. The proof that there's a better way. Lyra sat in the front row, her posture confident now, her eyes bright with determination. Garrett sat beside her, older than the other students, but no less committed. And scattered throughout the hall were faces Sarah had come to know well. Students who'd arrived broken and left whole, who'd learned not just healing techniques, but how to stand tall in a world that wanted them small. "Go out there," Sarah said. "Heal the sick, teach the ignorant, show everyone you meet that the old rules were lies. And when they try to make you choose between being Omega and being powerful," she smiled, fierce and proud, "you tell them that Sarah Vance said you get to be both." The graduates rose as one, their voices joining in the oath they'd written themselves. Not the traditional healer's oath with its emphasis on deference and humility, but something new, something bold. "We swear to heal without prejudice, to teach without restriction, to serve without submission. We swear to honor both strength and intuition, both Alpha and Omega, both tradition and innovation. We are healers. We are partners. We are the future." As the ceremony concluded and the graduates dispersed to their new assignments throughout the kingdom, Rowan found Sarah standing at the academy's entrance, watching them go. 23 healers, he said. "It's a start. It's more than a start. It's proof." Sarah gestured at the departing graduates. 23 people who'll go into the world and show others what's possible. They'll train more. Those students will train others. In a generation, maybe 2, the old hierarchy will be a historical footnote. And you'll be remembered as the one who broke it. "I hope not." Sarah's voice was soft. "I hope they remember all of us. Every Omega who refused to be silenced. Every Alpha who chose partnership over domination. Every person who looked at the system and said, 'This isn't right,' and fought to change it." She looked at Rowan. "Especially you. None of this would have worked without you. I just followed your lead. You did more than that. You were the first Alpha to truly see Omegas as equals, to trust one with your life, to fight beside one as a partner. You set the example everyone else is following now." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the last of the graduates disappear down the road. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, and for a moment everything felt perfect. Balanced. Right. "What's next?" Rowan asked. Sarah smiled. "We keep building, keep teaching, keep proving that there's a better way." She took his hand, "And we do it together, as partners, as equals, as proof that the future is already here." The academy bells rang out, calling the evening session to order. New students would be arriving tomorrow, eager to learn, ready to be part of the revolution. And Sarah would be there to teach them, to guide them, to show them that they were more than the labels society tried to force on them. She was no longer the disgraced healer, no longer the exile, the outcast, the woman blamed for a queen's death. She was Sarah Vance, master healer, founder of the new order, the Omega who'd shattered a conspiracy and rebuilt a kingdom. But more importantly, she was proof that one person could make a difference, that courage and truth could overcome even the most entrenched systems, that the weakest voice, when raised in righteous fury, could topple empires. And as she walked back into the academy, Rowan beside her, students gathering for the evening lessons, Sarah knew that this partnership, this equality, this new world they were building together was worth every moment of suffering that had come before. The old order was dying. The new order had begun, and it would never be stopped. Years later, when the historians wrote about the Great Reformation, they would point to this moment as the turning point. The day an exiled Omega healer proved that the hierarchy was a lie. The day partnership replaced domination. The day the kingdom began healing from centuries of self-inflicted wounds. But Sarah never thought in terms of historical moments. She thought in terms of the students she taught, the lives she saved, the people she helped become their fullest selves. She thought in terms of Lyra, who would go on to become the youngest master healer in kingdom history and develop new techniques that would save thousands. She thought in terms of Garrett, who would establish healing clinics in the outer districts, bringing quality care to people who'd been forgotten by the old system. She thought in terms of every Omega who could now stand tall, every Alpha who could choose cooperation, every person who was finally free to be who they truly were. That was the real revolution. Not the dramatic confrontation with Draven, not the spectacle of the council trial, not even the founding of the academy. The real revolution was in every small choice, every daily decision to treat people as equals, every moment of partnership over domination. It was quiet, incremental, unstoppable. And Sarah Vance, the healer who'd been cast out for daring to be extraordinary, spent the rest of her days making sure that no one would ever have to fight that battle alone again. The kingdom had been reborn, and the song of resonance, once forbidden, once feared, now echoed through every healing hall, every training academy, every corner of the realm. A song of partnership, a song of equality, a song of hope, and it would never, ever be silenced again.